So now I'm going to invite Javon Sands, one of the climate change youth ambassadors. He's going to be doing a presentation on the climate fraction. Does adaptation over mitigation equal resilience? So I'll welcome Javon to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Perfect. So I'm just going to get started right away as we're pressed for time. I'll be presenting the climate fraction, aka climate action, talking about adaptation versus mitigation, both here locally in the Bahamas, but also on a global scale, and thinking about what those different framings mean for us. So before I get into the actual presentation, I want to spend some time thinking about this framework of the climate fraction. So for the climate fraction, we're talking about adaptation over mitigation. Adaptation being responding to the impacts of climate change, mitigation being trying to reduce the causes of climate change, being greenhouse gas emissions. And resilience, we're going to get more into that later and in our panel. Now, the question is, does adaptation over mitigation equal resilience? And the short answer is maybe, kind of yes, but it's a bit more complicated than that. In our local context, adaptation over mitigation does equal resilience because for us, as a small island developing states, adaptation should be a primary priority due to the fact that climate change is already underway. We've heard of the many impacts that we're already experiencing, and so we need to find ways to be strategic about responding to those impacts right now. Mitigation is more of a global priority, and mitigation prioritized over adaptation does also equal resilience because if we can prevent harmful effects of climate change from happening through limiting greenhouse gas emissions, then we can also have a resilient climate future. So as we move into the presentation, we're going to talk about how the climate catastrophe is on the horizon for small and developing states, which makes adaptation of vital importance for us, as I mentioned, whereas globally, mitigation is the main priority for climate action, which creates an uncertain future for us SIDS that are facing the imminent risks happening now. So we'll understand a bit more about mitigation efforts happening globally. And we're going to go through each of these images on the screen. In keeping with the idea of the fraction, I hope you all just pay attention in math. Fractions. Mitigation is the lowest common denominator. Anyone knows what that means? I hear an yes, but I don't hear an answer. Okay. Mitigation is the lowest common denominator. In this context, what that means is that it's what everyone's thinking about when they think about climate action. We want to get carbon emissions down globally. We want to reduce the amount of emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. And global mitigation efforts are primarily aimed at that, but they also largely involve energy systems change because the energy that we use to do everything is where those carbon emissions come from, fossil fuels. And in that top left, top left, we're looking at energy efficiency, which is one of the mitigation efforts, because if we're more efficient with how we use energy, we're using less of it, then we are producing less greenhouse gas emissions. On the far right, we're thinking about behavior change, so that involves thinking about the global problem, but then acting locally in your capacity here in the Bahamas. And we've heard a lot about the different actions you can take at the end of our last panel, so I hope you all was paying attention to that. And then lastly, the main thing is trying to just reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which means using less fossil fuels entirely and responding to the challenges within our energy systems. That looks like renewable energy transition, which involves shifting to renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and hydropower to reduce carbon emissions. The energy efficiency measures are around improving the energy efficiency in buildings, so thinking about the lighting and heating of buildings, in transportation, thinking about electric vehicles, and in industries, that's more along the lines of reducing the amount of heat you need to manufacture things and do industrial processes, and to minimize our energy consumption on all those levels. And then another point here is afforestation and reforestation, which is thinking about the natural, nature-based solutions to this problem and how we can expand forest cover through these options of afforestation, which is planting trees where there weren't trees before, reforestation, which is replanting trees where they have been destroyed by hurricanes or development. Because our plant life sequester, that means take carbon out of the atmosphere. Okay. Now this is going to be a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try my best to break it down. The challenge with mitigation, aka the reason why it shouldn't be our biggest priority, is one, atmospheric concentration of CO2 up in the atmosphere. The scary truth about climate change is that mitigation alone can no longer solve the problem. And what that means is that because we've already increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, that's what this image is showing. As you can see, these are CO2 molecules, particles, in the atmosphere. The upper level is further out into the atmosphere, and the coloring, the light blue, means the molecules themselves are colder, and the darker colors, the red, means that they're warmer. And what is happening here, the reason why climate change is primarily happening due to global warming, the reason why the Earth is warming, is because CO2 traps heat, but the way it traps heat and how it traps heat is through this atmospheric process, chemical process going on. So what happens is the molecules get energized, and they have to release that energy and then go off into the rest of the atmosphere. In the process of trying to do that, the higher up you go and the colder it gets, the less energy you have. And so the molecules try to concentrate and keep the heat down to the lower level, which is where we are, and which is why we feel the heat. And so that's as simple as I can get it. The second challenge, which is also very complicated, is a result of something called multilateralism, which is a global governance system. And a lot of the challenges with that lead to blame shifting, creating a sad reality that those primarily responsible for the problem shift the blame onto countries like ours and create loopholes that make it challenging to respond to this problem for us and for the rest of the world. And so some of those loopholes are linked to offsetting initiatives, so trying to offset your own carbon responsibility into other places by buying your way, basically. And also loopholes in dodging compensation initiatives, and a lot of things that get a lot more complicated at the higher level in terms of climate negotiations. Okay, we're going to move on to building resilience and adaptive capacity in the next few slides. So with building resilience, it demands a greater adaptation attention at the local level and greater support on the global scale. And that support usually looks like financial or economic support from the global community, because we need climate finance in order to create adaptation initiatives and adaptation strategies locally. And that finance comes through a whole chain of actions and other complicated channels, but essentially we need more of it right now to respond to things like hurricanes and the damages that they cause. It also is a collective effort that features cohesion and collaboration across sectors, citizens, and species. So as in keeping with the theme of our panel and of our conference, people, planet, and purpose, linking up all of these things together and creating collective action is extremely important for building resilience. And then resilience requires systems thinking, feedback mechanisms, and a strong research culture. Okay. And we're going to lead with our adaptive capacity climate action framework. But first, adaptive capacity is the potential or ability of a system, region, or community to adapt to the effects or impacts of climate change. And that definition is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the way that this adaptive capacity can be implemented is it's going to come in the next slides, but the enhancements of adaptive capacity represents a practical means of coping with changes and uncertainties in climate, including extreme events, including variability and extremes. Okay. So here are some of those adaptation strategies. Starting with resource management, implementing sustainable water management and agricultural practices to adapt to changing climate conditions. Infrastructure resilience, upgrading infrastructure to withstand climate-related hazards such as floods, storms, and heat waves. Community engagement, empowering communities to develop local adaptation plans and build social cohesion. Oh, my bad. And then onto policy and governance under adaptive capacity. So in this arena, we need inclusive policies, and the way to move forward on that is by establishing participatory policy-making processes that involve all stakeholders in decision-making from policy design to implementation, as well as adaptive governance, which involves evolving existing rules and norms to improve adaptive capacity, manage the uncertainties with foresight and flexibility, as well as embracing the complexities of the climate change problem. And then more on the research culture that needs to be developed. Those effective policies and good governance must be informed by research to achieve the development aims and strengthen our local climate resilience. The innovative adaptation strategies that we need are driven by context-specific research and development, and creating a more climate-just education system through climate education and engaging individuals and communities in knowledge sharing on climate change, as well as honing in on community empowerment through community-based approaches that encourage grassroots initiatives, community-based organizations, and citizen science projects. So, that's a brief introduction to the adaptation over mitigation problem, adaptive capacity, and building resilience. And we're going to get further into that with our panel coming up.
Okay, so we are at the home stretch before lunch, so we're almost there. So I beg you guys just for your attention for a little bit longer. I promise the next panel will be super exciting, and our climate change ambassador, Javon, he'll be leading that panel as well. So I just have a few bios, and then we're going to go straight into it. So this next panel will be on building adaptive capacity and resilient communities. And I'll start off with Mr. Aaron Sargent. So Mr. Aaron Sargent is an accomplished organizational leader with over a decade of diverse experience managing and leading teams to meet strategic business goals. His career is marked by a detail-oriented and innovative approach, fostering efficiency and positive workplace culture. Mr. Sargent served in multiple senior leadership positions in the nonprofit and public service sectors. As the communications manager at Hands for Hunger, he maintained the organization's corporate brand, elevated public awareness, and significantly boosted fundraising efforts despite the challenging COVID-19 lockdowns. In his role as Assistant General Manager of Public Relations and Information Technology at the Bahamas Agricultural and Industrial Corporation, he successfully rebranded the corporation and enhanced its digital footprint, whilst also leading IT infrastructure development. During his tenure as the Managing Director of the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, DRA, Mr. Sargent led crucial initiatives like the relaunch of the Abaco Hurricane Shelter and Community Center, and revamped the Finance and Human Resources departments. More recently, Mr. Sargent was an integral member of the team that oversaw the merger of the DRA with the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, to form the Disaster Risk Management Authority, where he currently serves as Managing Director. Mr. Sargent's leadership can be characterized by effective project management and analytical thinking, fostering strong relationships with colleagues, partners, and clients throughout his career. He has sought to drive tangible, positive impact both within the organizations he has led and in the communities they serve. So we'll welcome Mr. Aaron Sargent to the stage. Next, we have Mr. Chris Wilson. Chris directs the day-to-day operation at BEST and personally manages the largest projects in the company's portfolio. Chris has over 10 years of construction experience on a wide variety of civil and utility projects covering the installation of electricity distribution systems, potable water, fire mains, irrigation, drainage, gravity sewer, force main, wastewater treatment plants, lift stations, water features, pools, buried hydronic and condensing water piping, lined man-made lakes, HV and LV electrical data and telecom duct banks, LPG piping and concrete work. He is expert at managing field crews or taking projects from inception, estimating and bidding, through to completion, ordering materials, organizing labor, materials and equipment, and generally organizing the execution of the works. Chris is expert in successfully translating engineering to completed construction operations. His wide experience and understanding of the construction industry in general and the Bahamas specifically, making him one of the most qualified and capable solar energy practitioners in the country. Chris is responsible for company financial management and policy execution, cash flow management, and personnel. He oversees project management and coordinates between BEST operations and BEST business development. We'll welcome Mr. Chris Wilson to the stage. Now we have Mrs. Charlene Colley. Charlene Colley is an alumna of SAC class of 1989. She began her tertiary education at the College of the Bahamas, where she obtained an Associate of Arts degrees in Architectural Drafting and Design and in Construction Engineering. Graduating with the Outstanding Construction Engineering Student Award, she obtained a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Louisville, Speed Scientific School in Louisville, Kentucky. She is a registered professional civil engineer in the United Kingdom, Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and United States of America. She returned home and since then has completed many major national infrastructure projects throughout the country, including the New Providence Road Improvement Project, where she was the face of the project engineer, and public relations officer. She supervised the construction, extension, and refurbishment of Milo Butler Highway, runways, road construction, and seawalls on several family islands, including the new 4-lane JFK Drive, the Airport Gateway Project, from the airport, to name a few. She currently serves as project coordinator for the IDB-funded programs at the Ministry of Works and Family Island Affairs Project Implementation Unit, where she is undertaking the construction and upgrade works at 4 major airports and coastal infrastructure projects in the Family Islands. She is always willing to share her knowledge and experience with anyone she encounters and is adamant about training and developing the next generation of engineers in the Bahamas. She is passionate about civil engineering through infrastructural development and, by extension, improving the country. Charlene's love for community building extends beyond infrastructure to people, as evidenced by her time served as the president of Society of Women Engineers, a member of the National Society of Black Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers while in university. She also served as an adjunct faculty member of the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute between 1997 and 2007, a technical trainer at the Technical Cadet Corps program from 2015 to 2019, and volunteered with the Youth Empowerment Program from 2016 to 2018. So we'll welcome Mrs. Charlene Colley to the stage. Lastly, we have Melissa Ingram. Melissa Ingram is an environmental and climate scientist dedicated to advancing resilience in small island developing states. She currently serves as a climate change officer within the Office of the Prime Minister in the Bahamas, where she supports the development and implementation of national climate policy, public education campaigns, and youth-focused initiatives such as the Bahamas Youth Climate Conference. She helped put this together, guys. With over 5 years of experience in climate advocacy, conservation, and environmental education, Melissa brings a strong foundation in stakeholder engagement and project coordination, skills honed through her leadership roles at the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection, and with the Bahamas 100K Tree Planting Initiative. Melissa holds a Master of Science in Climate Change from Maynooth University in Ireland and a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Tampa. She has represented the Bahamas at regional and international forums, contributing to conversations on capacity building and adaptation for small islands. Committed to science, communication, and community empowerment, she blends technical knowledge with a passion for persevering biodiversity and fostering local solutions to the climate crisis. So we'll invite Melissa Ingram to the stage. And our moderator will be Javon Sanders to this panel.
Thank you so much, Waynisha, for the lovely introductions, and welcome to my panelists. We're going to get right into it. So, I think up first we're going to start talking about this thing called adaptive capacity, and I want to lead with Mr. Wilson on this one. I'm curious about how has renewable energy and improved waste management practices helped to build the adaptive capacity on your island?
Okay, it's working. Okay, so I don't particularly just work on one island. Currently I'm working on 6 or 7. And we've introduced solar and battery on all of these islands. Not all of them have the same sort of waste management strategy because we work with large cruise ship companies all the way down to, private islands. But I'd say quite a lot of them have sort of similar waste management, and that's key. Most of them ban the little plastic bottles that we're all drinking from now. And mainly because anything that you bring to an island, you either need to burn or get off of the island as well. So I'd say all of them, either they manage that plastic or they say you can only bring in like aluminum cans because they can actually package those up and send them back off again, or any plastic or wood or cardboard can get burned, but that also means that they all have to then purchase incinerators, and then they have to have some sort of fossil fuel to ignite those initially before the actual combustible materials can continue that reaction, right? So it's investing in all of those things as well. So it's not just banning plastics, but it's also, you got to look at anything that you bring there, you can't just leave there. So you've got to, even food waste, so most of them, besides having the incinerators, they also have digesters. So if you've got food waste on an island, and it's a small island, but you've also got boats coming back and forth, maybe you've got lots of birds. We work on a lot of islands in the Exuma Keys, so there's a lot of bird life there. If you don't get rid of your food waste, then you've got rats. So then the rats eat the eggs and the birds, and it's, it's spiraling out of control. Maybe you've got iguanas, And anything that you bring to that island, you've got to either take care of, burn, get off of the island. And there's also the opposite side of that. If you didn't bring it there, it's not there. So it's fun working with like U.S. contractors that come to a tiny little island in the middle of nowhere and expect there to be a Home Depot right there. So if you didn't bring one little nut or bolt or screw, you're now flying that to that island. So that 5-cent nut is now $1,500. So you got to consider that too. From the solar aspect, that has solar and battery. That has a huge impact. The islands that we see the biggest impact is where they're targeting at least a sort of 80 to 90% penetration, because that actually allows them to turn the generators off for multiple days. even the smaller islands where they're achieving sort of 50-60% penetration, that reduces their fuel usage significantly so that they no longer have fuel deliveries or as often. Because one of the bigger hazards, bigger risks, bigger problems with a lot of these places is actually getting the fuel there and how frequently they'll come. And then there's obviously the risk of bunkering while they're there. That's probably one of the, I'd say, most hazardous times for most of these small islands, because they're bunkering tens, if not, I won't say 100,000 gallons at a time, but most of the islands that we're working on, they've probably got 40, 60, 80,000 gallons of storage on those islands, and that's a lot of risk. So if you can go from filling up, once a month to filling up every 6 months, one island we're working on, they're basically down to once a year, which is really good. But I'm sorry, I can't remember the PR lady who was up here earlier, but she made a very good point, and to be honest with you, as an engineer, it kind of irks me to say this, but PR is probably one of the biggest things. Each one of these islands, they have probably 20 people working on them. But if you don't make the people on that island aware of their actual usage and, that 1 gallon of water, it's not just 1 gallon of water, it's, I'd say a gallon of diesel, but, it's all of that. It's everything on the back of that. So flipping off a light, not wasting water, not running that dishwasher, that wash machine every night, every time for what, it all has an impact. Using low flush toilets, and one of the big ones that we're trying to push more these days is using heat pump water heaters, because everybody's just used to electric resistive. But if you have a heat pump water heater, you're actually extracting 3 times as much energy out of that same kilowatt hour of electricity that's being consumed. And it doesn't necessarily sound like a lot. You think, oh, water heating, but the average person's bill is probably 20% of the electric bill might be water heating. Wow. So if you can cut that 20% down to 7%, that's money.
This is all taking me back to my MSc coursework where we touch on all of these things, and I think that's such a well put together response that touches on both the behavior change aspect as well as the challenges inherent to being a small island, which if you scale it up to like the archipelago of the Bahamas and bringing things into here, especially when it comes to thinking about the renewable energy transition and thinking about how we adapt to climate change and our infrastructure challenges, the risk that we face with our infrastructure challenges because we're small islands. I think that's really, really important. Thank you so much. I think we'll move to Director Sargent to give another aspect of those challenges and telling us about what are the most pressing climate-related hazards that the Bahamas has to adapt to, and how is the DRM strategies evolving in response to that.
Okay. Thank you, Javon. And let me just say before I start, one of the things I got to tell my comms team, they forgot to put the most important point in my bio, which is I am also an alumni of SAC as well.
So it's how much of us is up?
Good. I'd just like to start by saying, how many of us feel the temperature outside? All of us run AC. Again, that's one of the threats I think the Bahamas and other small island developing states are faced with, primarily hurricanes, coastal erosion, coastal flooding, sea level rise. These are the things that are impacting us on a daily basis due to climate change. And on the disaster risk management, as we now call it in the space side, this is some of the things that the new authority is dealing with. How many of you know that there's a new authority that manages disasters? Any hands? So many of us knew what was my predecessor, which is NEMA. So you know what NEMA is. All right, there's no more NEMA due to the legislative changes. And Javon, you mentioned something in your presentation about policy. I think policy is the backbone of any sort of institutional, legislative, and structural change that drives what we want to see. And so with that, over the last 3-4 years, the government of the Bahamas would have changed the legislation on disaster risk management to move its response to a more risk-based response to disasters. We've seen the increasing threats to our country. So most recently last year, while it was relatively low, our regional brothers and sisters saw Hurricane Beryl. Hurricane Beryl would have intensified in a matter of 24 hours. So back in the day, we could have gotten a 7-day warning. Last year I went to bed, I always tell the story, I went to bed on a Friday night with Hurricane Oscar, having 20% chance of a formation. It had no chance, according to Met Office, according to NOAA, a formation. Saturday morning, I got a call from the Chief Met Office to say, hey, you have to activate the National Emergency Operations Center. I am issuing a hurricane warning. The hurricane formed directly over Inagua. So little to no chance for us to alert the public to prepare. And so over the last year, since the formation of the authority, one of the things that we've been keen on is driving communication, using community outreach to kind of build that bridge to help Bahamians to understand that we have to prepare early, prepare now. I heard one of the panelists in the prior session talk about life vests. It's a serious thing. Many residents in Abaco and Grand Mamba talk about being trapped in their roofs and they don't have the necessary tools to chip their way out, and then to be faced with the 16-foot, 20-foot storm surge that came inland. So imagine 16, just look at this building, imagine 16 to 20 feet and no life vests. And unfortunately, a lot of us cannot swim. So these are the type of things that we have to prepare ourselves with. And so from the authorities' perspective, our approach to disaster management, it is a whole of country approach, not just government, not just central government. I know we rely heavily on central government, but we want to decentralize our approach to how we manage disasters. That's super important because we all have a part to play. We all have to ensure that our homes are secured. We do the right things in terms of insurance. We make sure that our neighbors are covered. We know where our elderly members of society are. We know where Grammy are. We know where our aunts are. We know where our friends are. Helping them to understand how important it is to plan early. Another key component is community-based disaster management. So preparing, utilizing the tools that we are trying to put in place, and our team has been working feverishly over the last few months to the point where it's getting some international recognition on the advancement of our legislation. A number of my Caribbean counterparts are asking for copies of our legislation to build or rebuild the institutional infrastructure as it relates to disaster management. And so using legislation to drive the changes that we want to see. So that's whether that's developing new robust national disaster emergency plans. So moving away just from responding and having an institution that just responds, but now having the teeth to develop risk analysis, look at historical data, using data to drive our advancements. I just recently came from a mission to China, to their IT hub, integrating IT in our weather forecasting modeling that helps us to be more predictive as it relates to storms. So these are some of the things that we're doing, as well as using the community outreach perspective. We recently did 2 community walkabouts. We plan to hold a lot more town halls that help our citizens to be more sensitized to what is out there. Again, we now no longer have extra time to prepare. So we encourage people, to get your family disaster management plans together. I know a lot of people don't do it. Show of hands, anybody in their family has prepared a disaster plan? How many of you know where your shelters are? I see 2, 3. Okay, good. But please share it with your friends who may not have. They may not know where to find the shelter listing. You can find those on getready.gov.bs. It's a free resource. Even has templates on plans that you can use to assist you in developing those tools to help you manage at your own personal level for disaster management. And so again, some of those things, that's what the authority is working on feverishly to get us to a point where we're able to manage. These things are going to intensify. They're going to get a lot worse. Dorian showed us exactly what is to come. And God forbid that, this is a never-ending cycle of events that threaten what we go through on a daily basis. And so, I encourage people to get ready. Don't wait to get prepared. Prepare today. Share the information. Share information that you may find. Utilize the authority in whatever ways. We are open to providing this necessary support for a number of individuals, groupings, NGOs, etc. And you will be hearing from us on some of the NGO inclusions into the disaster operations and what we do at the DRM Authority.
Excellent. So you're already hearing about ways to get involved, and you're also hearing a lot about, again, the risk and challenges under this umbrella of climate change and how we as a nation are working to build our adaptive capacity, but also how it is a whole systems approach that is needed. I want to turn to Officer Ingram now to give us a systems perspective on what the key areas are that the Bahamas must build adaptive capacity in to meet these climate risks head on.
Can you guys hear me? Awesome. So I guess just building off of what's already been said on stage, in terms of adaptive capacity, it's very important that from a country perspective, we look at this as a cross-sectoral issue. We need to ensure that all of the sectors that are relative to climate change, which all are impacted, everyone needs to be educated and become aware of how they can contribute to what needs to happen from an adaptation level. And this ties very directly close to what Sergeant has been speaking about. When you think about adaptation, think about disaster preparedness. We have so much, a variety of different impacts that climate change is going to be, I guess, asserting here on us, not just in the Bahamas, but in the region and especially globally as well. But here in particular, of course, we have rising sea levels. We have increasing storms and intensifying storms at that. We have saltwater intrusion within our groundwater table. And then, of course, intensifying heat. That's been something that's been brought up throughout the morning session. And so when we think about becoming more adaptive, how can we look at, for instance, infrastructure, energy production, food security? How can we tie all of these sectors in together and look at it as a system-based approach so that we're making sure that we're not leaving anything behind and we're trying to work towards being more sustainable as we are seeing these impacts come in and hit us. And that's one thing I would like to just raise to the floor as we continue the conversation. We are different pillars sitting here as we're having this conversation, but we're also intertwined into the climate spiel because, like I said, it is cross-sectoral. And so just giving that, I guess, perspective.
Thank you. And I think now I want to hear more about how the more specific areas of our adaptation plans are underway. And so I'll turn to Director Cawley to discuss your work in the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Program and how that work is helping the Bahamas to adapt to rising sea levels and more intense storms that we're experiencing.
Okay, thank you, Javon, for that question. In the ICZM, Integrated Coastal Zone Management, helps us make decisions ahead of and be able to respond to climate change, such as sea level rise. And I'll give you an example. Under the Climate Resilience Program that I'm currently managing, it's imperative that we create nearshore management plans. Those plans then will feed into hazard and vulnerability maps that will definitely support DRM and what Melissa's working on as well. So as she said, we're interconnected in many ways. And I'm hoping we're not utilizing resources, doubling the resources. So we try to work together as much as possible to keep each other informed. So those types of maps are happening from our side at the Ministry of Works on the technical team to create those so that we'll be able to respond better and also help with the analysis of these maps and the vulnerable areas to integrate into our engineering designs. And hopefully we'll get further with DRM to create national zoning is what we're also needing to work on and be able to respond to disasters as well. So even helping us create disaster risk management plans as well. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And I also want to hear
Javon?
more about... Yeah?
I just want to touch
right
on
ahead.
that. And those are two critical points as Ms. Cawley raised. What's interesting is in our space, we've seconded a number of various key skilled work workers and team members out of Ministry of Works. Henry Moxie leads our disaster operations team. He's a former senior engineer at Ministry of Works. And one of the things we just talked about this morning is integrating those hazard maps, the work that you're doing, into the work that we're doing. It helps us to pre-plan and assess whether or not we're going to have something. So in particular, when I go to activate a shelter, I need to know if I'm putting people in harm's risk by sending them to that shelter what may have flood risk. And that's the important use of technology and data, giving us the leaders to make that informed decision. And so when I say to my minister and to Prime Minister, we can't activate that shelter, it's backed by data, not what I feel. And that's what happened in the past, and not knocking what was in the past. I think they laid a foundation for us to build on when it comes to disaster management, risk assessment, and even zoning. Because zoning, a number of people build in areas that they shouldn't build in, which creates a challenge on my end when we now have to tell you to evacuate and you don't want to leave.
So, Siobhan, let me add to that as well, because I think we're going to end up building on each other. So, under the program that we're managing now, we have 4 pilot sites. And those pilot sites are, one is in New Providence, some in Central Long Island, East Grand Bahama, and Andros Island. Right? And at those pilot sites, we would have undertaken from ground zero baseline data collection and baseline studies that help us inform. In fact, during your presentation, one of the results of our findings and data collection was adaptation. So for the Bahamas and other small island development states, there's not a question on just jumping to mitigation. Adaptation is very real, and it's something that we actually have to implement ASAP right now. So we're going to have to learn how to live with the water, which is our most prominent impact, whether it's hurricanes or floods. And thankfully, through our stakeholder meetings, I was very excited to learn from the stakeholders, those who are directly impacted. Don't be fooled. The family islanders, our family islanders, are very aware of the environment. They have a lot of information that they can share and input, which was very helpful to us during our data collection studies, and then, as a result, the design options. They may not be able to put it in paper or in writing, but that's where we feed off of them. So the local stakeholders on these islands have a lot of impact and a lot of input. They may not be aware themselves, but from our meetings and our stakeholder engagements, it was extremely helpful and viable that will feed into, and hopefully in the long term will be beneficial to all. And I think our aim in general across the board, across the sectors, is to ensure that we help save lives, right? We may not be able to stop. Chris is busy working on different measures to mitigate in advance, and we may not be able to stop because it's natural, it's nature. But how we respond to these disasters is important, and bounce back and the return after that. And the number of lives we get to save ahead of, being totally unaware. Okay?
Thank you both. That was excellent. I think I was coming to 2 questions that you already answered in there. And so I want to move to hearing from Officer Ingram again about how can climate science and policy be better translated into local action across sectors and islands? So how do we have this less of a top-down approach, but how do we infuse this into work happening across the archipelago?
So thank you for the question, and thank you for the feedback from my panelist colleagues. I think the information that we're discussing is very insightful, and it's definitely, like you said, we build on top of what we're speaking about. And one thing, I guess, relative to the question that Javon has raised, how are we going to ensure that we bring our technical knowledge down to a user-friendly knowledge? I have a science background, and so me saying numbers and me saying certain things, thinking you might have the same level of understanding as me, might not be true. And so ensuring that communication is something that we really think about, and we're very intentional about communicating to different audiences, whether it's youth, whether it's older or middle-aged persons, different backgrounds, just ensuring that we're dialing it down to a user-friendly level, but also communicating education and awareness at a larger extent as well. In the Bahamas, we're seeing these climate risks. We've mentioned zone planning. We've mentioned coastal communities, heat, all of the different impacts the persons are having. Once you are aware of them, just ensuring that how you in different areas or you in different exposure hazards, how these things are going to impact you and contribute to this from an awareness aspect, but then also how you can, I guess, influence your community, getting into the communities and ensuring that persons at that level, from a home to a community to a, I guess, island-wide basis, and then at a country level, everyone is engaged to just understanding generally where their impact risk level is at, and ensuring that we're having our preparedness side of building resilience. Just, I think at a glance, yeah.
And continuing with the idea of building resilience and this translating the technical knowledge and also discussing sort of the policy impacts and applications, I want to hear the voices going in the other direction. So turning back to Mr. Wilson, about what further support, technical or policy-wise, would help you to scale up your efforts or can allow for replication across the wider Bahamas?
I mean, to be honest with you, I think that the government is trying. At the moment, I'm really hopeful that there'll be some visibility as far as like the smaller microgrids that are going across the different islands. I think that's hugely important. Again, just to harp on the fact that, you know, everything right now runs off of either automotive diesel or Clifton is Bunker C or LNG. But just trying to get that stuff to those islands and building the infrastructure on those islands to get that there, it's a huge issue. And if you can cut down the amount that you have to get there, then obviously, you know, that's a lot more resilient. Yeah, you think about after a hurricane, if the infrastructure that is damaged to bring that fuel in is then how are you going to get electricity for people? And then everybody's out, and if you don't have electricity, you don't have data, you don't have water, you don't have, you know. I was living in Eleuthera, South Eleuthera, for basically a year and a half recently. And every time the power went out, the water went out, right? So, and then the data went out. And then, you know, you're talking 100 years ago now. So it's, you know, it's all to do with that. And if you don't have resilience to that, and if you can sort of break it up into smaller and manageable pieces, then, and it's what they've been doing in Nassau. Recently, I don't know if anybody paid attention with all the brand new trucks flying around, but they've been putting in places where they can isolate the system locally, so you don't have to turn the whole of eastern New Providence or central New Providence off to work on a particular part, and that's incredibly important. You know, it feeds back into everything. You know, again, when they had to cut everything off before, they're losing revenue, and so you're shooting yourself in the foot. Whereas if you now work on a smaller area, you're only inconveniencing a smaller number of people. You're only, you know, losing the revenue for that smaller area. It's the same thing. If you can do it in Eleuthera, I mean, Eleuthera's really got two main power plants. I mean, you don't really want to consider Harbor Island part of that. There's a submarine cable that goes between them. But if you lose that submarine cable, then you might as well, you know, there goes Harbor Island. There goes 5 megawatts out of your 12 megawatts for all of North Eleuthera, you know. Yeah, it's all to trying to break up that engineering problem into smaller, more manageable problems, and then having the people that can deal with those or respond to those problems quickly and more easily without inconveniencing everybody. And that's what I mean by trying to break those up into smaller microgrids. It would, you know, not having to get that diesel there, not having to, you know, it would just make life so much easier, you know, and better for the people there. You know, again, like nobody wants to be without electricity for a month. You know, nobody wants to not have water. You know, you don't have water, you don't have, you know, sanitary living conditions. How are you supposed to cook, eat, clean? Yeah, it's. You know, I remember back as far as like 1992 with Hurricane Andrew, and that was probably one of the worst ones that I'd experienced. But going to Eleuthera after that, I mean, that was months. I mean, that's people's lives. You know, I went to Abaco like 3 days after Dorian, and it was just devastating. It's like, where do you start? There's nothing. So yeah, if you can build up little pockets where you can bring this on, you can bring that on, everybody can then start feeding back into that, and then there's something to start with. Whereas if there's nothing, then you're totally out of luck.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure everyone in the room has had their own personal experience with hurricanes. I remember being in high school and like here in New Providence where the current was off for like 3 months, I think after like Matthew for some people. And I was like in 10th grade, and that was kind of I resonate with a lot of what's being said up here. One, I'm doing research right now on resilience. Two, I did my undergrad background in applied physics and engineering science. I was interested in civil engineering, and I'm wholly interested in how to promote adaptation locally here in the Bahamas. And so I've definitely resonated with a lot of what's being said up here, and I want to also hear more about what we can do collectively. So turning back to what many of you have already touched on in terms of the community-based approaches, I'll turn to you, Director Sargent, to just maybe explain more about specifically how the DRM is engaging the community planning activities, especially around integrating climate data and projections into community planning and emergency protocols.
So as I alluded earlier, I think one of the biggest things that community can do as it relates to community preparedness and readiness and to better equip themselves to respond to these natural hazard events is, understanding and having a knowledge of what is to come, what they should expect. I think knowledge is the first line of defense, and that's why we have sought to engage the community year-round. I know this year we started in May with regards to Preparedness Month, but we extended Preparedness Month throughout the hurricane season, so we will be in islands hosting town halls to better equip residents on how to prepare to manage some of these threats. One of the things that we also started to do more is to be more public-facing as it relates to being out in the community. So I talked about the community walkabouts. Through our legislation, it strengthens decentralizing our approach to the family islands. So on the family islands, we only have 2 offices, 2 satellite offices, one in Grand Bahama, one in Abaco. Where there's no office, the administrator is the representative of the authority. But what often happened in my review of what happened in the past is we often threw the responsibility onto the administrator, and as we know, administrators wear many hats in the family islands. What we're doing is trying to hold and support them in as much of the work, the disaster management work that they can do. So whether it is helping them to revamp their family island disaster emergency plans, we're in the process of rolling out new templated versions for them, supporting them through those initiatives, whether we conduct training exercises. So most recently, we did our national disaster readiness exercise where we simulated the entire island chain being impacted by a Category 4 storm. And I can tell you the effects are devastating. So New Providence alone would suffer from maybe 70 to 80% loss of infrastructure. There would be only certain components where I live in the southwestern portion of New Providence would be underwater. And again, these are the things that we have to start to show. And so we showed the exercise, and it's not to scare, but for us to understand the potential that these threats have. This year, instead of just doing a national exercise, we're also doing regional exercises in the family islands. So rather than bringing the administrators to New Providence, we're going in their local context to see what they would do when we put pressure and stress test them using our systems. So helping them to revamp the way that they respond at a local level, because each island has their own variations of risk. I know the last risk study that was done for disaster management was done by PDC, and that's the Pacific Disaster Center, which is based in Hawaii, was done some 5 years ago. I believe Cat Island and Auckland's had some of the highest risk because of the age of the population, as well as infrastructure. So when administrators do not have the tools necessary to respond, it may mean now that we now have to evacuate an entire island. These are the things that we're considering. We just recently got awarded a grant from the Caribbean Development Bank to develop the first of its kind national mass evacuation plan, which covers intra-island evacuations. So, looking at what may happen and how we move people. How do we move 300,000 people out of New Providence? Something that we have to now consider. How do we get traffic? Many of us have 3 and 4 cars in our families. Traffic jams, all of these things we are considering. But from a community level, these are the things that we're doing to help the community understand where we are. We're about to launch some new systems, templates on our websites, buddy systems that talk about looking out for your neighbors, talk about, showing you what you may need, how to check on relatives, etc. We also launched, which is a proud thing for me, similar to Climate Change Unit, the Disaster Risk Reduction Youth Ambassadors, and I hope they can make it here today. They actually have a summer internship with the authority for the entire summer. But using youth, as we are here today, to kind of spread, because it starts here, and most of the more structured, developed countries like Singapore, et cetera, with their disaster management, they start at the youth level. So they're able to infiltrate and teach this at the youth level, which translates into you taking this home to your parents, to your relatives, to support what we're doing and helping the community to understand what is needed to be done to help us manage disasters. So again, it's a community-based approach, a whole-of-country approach, and as my counterpart at Climate Change, Ms. Ingram, alluded to, an all-systems approach, breaking down these silos across government. One of the things that we're doing is also, creating a database for all of this information so we could share and be transparent and accessible to you, the residents, and also our counterparts in government. So when there's a hazard map that's done, we don't have to hear about it. We know that we can find it and go on and utilize it for whatever development, whether it's zoning that we need to do. These are some of the things that we are doing at the authority to support community-based disaster management.
Thank you. And I think we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I want to turn back to Director Cawley to hear about the gaps on the side of the actual institutions that are implementing different things. So in your case, what gaps may still exist in coastal resilience planning in the Bahamas and how local communities can aid in that, but especially what work is being done on the government side to navigate some of those gaps and hopefully close them.
Well, as Melissa and Sergeant said, as long as our sectors can communicate and create that database and maximize our resources, we are on the right track. And we've mentioned it here already today, the gaps. And I'm happy to hear some of the stuff that Sergeant is working on, because some of those gaps, and Melissa, from our end, is the cohesiveness of legislation and policies that they are working on, which is very good. The roles that each of our government agencies play in ICCM on disaster risks. Some of the gaps we've already mentioned is education and bringing in our local communities, right? And Sergeant mentioned one of the tools that they're using, which was my little secret for a long time through all of my work, is I get to the children and the teenagers. I get into those schools. I get in and I do my walkabouts. And once I could get to the younger, they get to their parents, their grandmothers, and everybody, and help me remind the adults. They want to comply, but then they also want to, do what they want to do. Yeah. Those are my people who help remind the adults, no, you can't do that. Ms. Cawley said, I said, now don't get me in trouble. But it works, right? When we start with our youth, I think that's our strong point, to make sure keep them involved and keep them in tune. As we did, we completed maybe a month ago an exercise across the island of Andros in mangrove planting and restoration. We took them from beginning to end. Those students stick to that program for about 15 months, where we sent them out to bring in proper girls, take care of them in the nursery, take care of them, showed you how much survived, how much didn't survive, how to manage them, how to and they grew them over a year, where they started with seedlings and got to see plantings, and take it straight home, where at the project pilot sites, they actually planted some of these, because they grew over 9,000 seedlings, over 9,000. I think it was about 12,000 that was collected and about 9,000 survived. And through that exercise at North, Central, South, and Mangrove Key, all the districts got to go to that pilot site and actually plant those seedlings. So they could drive by and said, I actually had a physical hands-on impact with helping protect my community. And one of the things I would say, it's important to start with the youth, because when we become our age and as adults, we know what we want to instill in them, but we tend to do what we want to do, right? And that's been working very well. But some of the gaps we've all shared and mentioned, and I see that we're all mitigating them as much as possible. And how the local communities can continue to impact that change is to share your experience, share your inputs. I know some of the things that I've encountered is stakeholder burnout, right? So I think, Melissa, that's when we first met, when we said we'd collaborate across our programs, because we had extreme stakeholder burnout. Oh, you're back again to ask this question. When are we going to see something? So we're now, from my end, and I think DRM, we're trying to get to that point where we can now show you what your inputs look like to help better protect your community. And I think if we continue in that direction, it'll definitely help us, from my end, in the technical, the engineers, how to create adequate or proper or best practices in the coastal solutions, right? Because it's important when we talk to them for them to tell me what they see or how they feel or when this was, right? And how it used to be. All that is critical for us. That feeds into all of our analyses. So legislation, policies, functions of government, community engagement, continue to do those, because those are useful tools, and they don't only help us help make decisions and create solutions, but they are sustainable because they feed into implementation and maintenance plans for the long term, right? So that we can continue this cycle of protecting, adapting, and protecting ourselves. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, that was a brilliant answer. And you've all been an amazing panel, and I'm sure our audience would agree. I think we're going to now turn, on your point about looking to the youth, we're going to turn to our audience in a second, but I just want the audience to join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. And now we're going to open to the floor for quick questions, because we do have to get to lunch, so we're probably going to cap it at 3 questions, if there are any questions from the audience. Not seeing any hands. Y'all probably hungry, okay. Okay, well, I think we're gonna move on to getting to lunch. And for lunch, you can exit through this left-hand door, and also at the back, people will be meeting you to guide you to where the restaurant is. And we'll just leave the panel with final comments before we take our picture and then head to lunch ourselves. So maybe we'll just start at the end and have any final words from our panelists.
So I'm not going to belabor lunch, because I know what it is to get to lunch. I'll leave you with this one phrase that we say at the DRM. Do not wait, get ready. Heed the warnings. Listen to the real and credible sources of information in this day and age of social media. Do not listen to the Facebook weather forecaster, please. Don't share it, because misinformation makes our work extremely difficult. So you can follow us. We have a really good comms team that are very active. This year we're launching a new alert system that is similar to the Marcos alert system. You will get it directly to your phone the minute we get information from the Met Office. Our team internally controls that through the support of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. So follow and heed the warnings. the law now states that if I give you an evacuation order, if you see myself on TV or the Prime Minister saying, hey, evacuate, once that order is given and we close the window for evacuations, we are not responsible to send the rescue teams out to save you during those times. So you may be cutting yourself off from help. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd just like to say is I'm really happy to see, you know, the youth here today. One of the biggest problems I think the Bahamas has is, you know, we all get educated and a lot of us go somewhere else and hardly ever come back. I graduated university 22 odd years ago, but I've spent 14 years back in the Bahamas. 8 of those, obviously, I was somewhere else. But I would really like to see a lot of people come back, you know. I'm happy to see University of the Bahamas is now doing a lot more things to do with science and staying in the Bahamas, so let's try and keep that going. One of the things that I would like to see the government implement is, you know, they're trying to do it, I guess, on the BPL bill, is actually see your input and see differences between last year and last month and things like that. But one of the biggest impacts you can have on people's lives is, like I said at the beginning, is actually seeing what's your impact and seeing it in black and white. There's so many of these, you know, devices now that have AI connected to them. You can actually put meters on your own service, and it'll tell you where your electricity is going. If you could, and the nice thing is, if the government implements that, they can have the data. Like I have an app on my phone right now. I can tell you how much power I'm using. It'll tell me what devices are running because it learns from the electrical signature what that device is. So it'll say, oh, I think it's a fridge, and you say, yeah, it's a fridge. I think it's a stove. I think it's a dryer. I think it's a washer. I think it's a water heater. And you can see what's using your power, and then that impacts you directly, and you can say, hey, you know, let me turn that off. I mean, one of the first things I said to Sergeant here when we came in, I said, I'm cold. I'm in here cold. You know, I strategically did not wear a jacket because I constantly go into offices in the Bahamas where it's 85, 90 degrees outside, and you go in and someone set the thermostat to 60 degrees, and you're like, why are you doing that? Because it's just going to, you're using more power, you're going to break the air conditioner, you're going to get mold, you're going to get all of these sorts of things on the back of it, but people just going, I'm hot. And it's the same people that are doing that, and they're wearing thick coats, and you're like, why are you wearing a thick coat? You know? Why are you doing that? But the visibility on stuff like that, you know, notices. I mean, how many government buildings do you go into where you just hear the AC is just blaring? You know, and you're like, why is it doing that? But if you actually, you know, put up little notices and say, hey, you used this much that last month. If you literally raise the thermostat by 1 degree, you might be cutting 10% off your electric bill. You know, that's that sort of policy, and it's great to have. And you don't have to be a science person to understand that when you put it in, you know, very clear visual things. You know, like again, your water. You got to think the water in the Bahamas is not just water. It's diesel. It's electricity. It's, you know, probably 90% of our water is coming from reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis uses a lot of electricity, you know. So, yeah, I think awareness is probably the biggest thing. And people have to get that. And like I say, if you have that power and you have that information, and that information gets shared, you know, if you know that the electricity is on in this spot, but it's not on in this spot, then you send people to that spot, right? You know, it's simple. And in the day that, you know, the age that we live in, you know, I can look at 10 different islands right now and tell you whether the power's on or not. You know, they can have that information too, and they should have that. You know, and I think that's where we need to go. And there are jobs on the back of that, and not, you know, non-technical jobs. You know, like should be well-paying jobs. You know, this is the Bahamas, and there's so much wealth here. There should be no reason that, you know, and I found it when I first came back. I mean, I had a university degree. I came back and I had a job that was paying, you know, I don't know, a couple $100 a week. It was, you know, like, hi, mechanical engineer. You know, why'd I go to university for 4 years? But, you know, that's the pain that you have to suffer here. But eventually, hopefully, you break through and, you know, you get a bit more experience. And, you know, but it is tough coming back here, you know, and you've got to encourage people to come back And I think that would be something as well, is maybe the public sector jobs need to get paid better, and be honest about it, you know? Don't, you know, why would people want to come back if there's nothing, and I've got a nice job in the States, and I got electricity on all the time, and I'm not hurt? But you've got to do that, you know? And I'm seeing 2 people this weekend that same age as me, both engineers, both Bahamians. One lives in Australia and one lives in Canada. And that's because when they left, it got too easy. They said, I'm not coming back. So yeah, those are the policy changes I would like to see.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can have some progress on that very soon for our youth coming up to be able to engage in climate action right here at home. Director Colley, do you have any last words for our audience?
My last words for the audience is I've mentioned 4 pilot sites under our current program. However, integrated coastal zone management will be touching all of the islands of the archipelago in the Bahamas. And we are aware of specific sites on all of these islands. However, budget kind of controls or directs what we need to impact first. So it's not just those 4 pilot sites, but on those 4 islands, the work continues and will continue on all of the family of islands in the archipelago of the Bahamas. So I didn't mention Eleuthera now, but we are aware of areas impacted on Eleuthera. I didn't mention Acklins or Maiguana, but areas are identified and being planned. So the planning does take some time because Wilson encounters with his work, it's not on the island, so it has to get there. So planning and logistics is extremely critical. And with those 2 items, the cost is extremely high. So what may cost a penny or a nickel today at the start, maybe $1,500 or more by the time it gets to the end game. So just so you know, the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Program is touching the archipelago of the islands. Okay? And please, as my colleague said, prepare, conserve, I'm going to say plan, and we'll see what Melissa will add to that, all in a vein of helping save ourselves. Okay? Take care, everyone.
I'm not really good at the game telephone, so I can't build off of that. But I will build off of the 3 colleagues in one part, and then I'll say something secondarily. Just to stress the importance of the decentralization of our country. Nassau is not the only island, and it's so important that we have persons in the room from other islands. Welcome, boop, boop, It's really heartwarming to see all of you guys. I'm very thankful that you've made the effort to be here at this conference, and I hope you do have a takeaway. You've learned something. If you need any additional questions, feel free to network, follow your relative agencies, different NGOs, government agencies, with respect to the work that we are doing, so that you can stay involved. And if you are trying to participate in any kind of ways, you can follow up to see how you can do so, as simple as joining memberships. So the panel before had mentioned join Brief, join BNT, follow us on social media to see what updates we have coming out. But again, just reemphasizing that all of the work that we are doing, we are trying to ensure that the family islands have direct, not necessarily access, but we're coming out into those communities so that we're ensuring that the information isn't just cut off at a technological level, just from technology, maybe, internet dropping, et cetera. It's important to have that in-person aspect as well. And we are working vigorously to ensure that we have that level of interaction. And then just with respect to the conference again, feel free to follow us on social media. The youth of our day is definitely our future, especially in the Bahamas with building resiliency. The entire purpose of a lot of the work that we're doing is to ensure that we're preserving our country for the future generations, which includes those of us in the room, as well as those who, plan to get married and have kids, the next generation that comes after us. And so the work that we're doing, including you being involved, whether it's just being aware or whether it's putting some level of action towards it. All of us are leaders in our own ways, and so I just wanted to leave us with that. Please do enjoy lunch. We have a nice spread coming up for y'all.
Okay, on the note of lunch, and well, actually, just one more thing before we leave. I just want to kind of consolidate the panel again, thank our panelists, but we've heard prepare, we've heard conserve, we've heard plan, and I think Melissa said engage. And so be sure to get involved with all of these things. And I love that the conversation turned towards sort of like this decentralization of policy, of like action and implementation of programs, especially across the entire archipelago, and focusing in on the Family Islands, which is the work that I hope to be doing within the coming year. And so I look forward to working with each of you to deliver that program as well. And now for lunch, for sure this time, I'll just have everyone come towards this door to my left, and there will be people to guide you to the restaurant. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all after lunch.